Across the board for guided hunters and do-it-yourself hunters up in the mountains at practical ranges of 200 yards to 450 yards on mule deer hunts and elk hunts, the reality is that those shots end up in pure misses or non-vital hits 35 to 50% of the time. 95% of those misses are avoidable with the 3 tips I'm going to cover in this video. This isn't advice that you're going to get from a competitive long-range shooter or someone trying to sell you the next whiz-bang rifle and accessories. This is just practical advice from a simple-minded hunting guide that has figured out a few things that work over time. The miss percentages I just mentioned are what I saw as a guide myself. I observed from tons of public hunters in the field. I've discussed it with game wardens, and I had a whole troop of guides working for me that saw similar results. We are specifically talking about mountain condition opportunities, right? When we're out chasing wild elk and wild mule deer, you know, those opportunities generally going to come with some time pressure, some animal movement, low light conditions, maybe physical pressure from the stock due to the terrain that we have to get behind us to get to that shot opportunity, and we're going to have to think about mountain winds. And the last relevant variable in these scenarios is that we're shooting in an angled environment. This is both the line of sight to the game animal is typically angled, but also the shooting platform, right? Like where we're setting up a rest is also angled. This is why you see many competent and experienced shooters scoped in the mountains, all right? And at the end of this video, I'm gonna show you a quick tip that will always keep you from that dreaded pain and embarrassment of an eyepiece engraving in your forehead. So let's jump directly into the tips, guys. Number 1, you have to solve what I call premature trigger pull. This is so incredibly basic and easy to solve, but it still accounts for easily 50% plus of misses. After a shot from a hunter, I always ask one question: how did it feel? I have some practical reasons for asking this. It gives me some insight into if what I observed might be different than what actually happened. I've watched shots that I thought were pure misses, and a guy told me it just felt good. I looked for blood, and sure enough, a dead animal was right there. It just happened to be a pass-through that looked like a miss from my angle. But what's more interesting when you ask this question is how often the hunter will say, not good, it didn't feel good, it didn't feel right. And then they will say something about how they just didn't feel like they could control the movement of the reticle, or they felt they shot a bit before they were ready. This seems so illogical, but it's so very common. It's part buck fever, but it's also part just not having a system that one goes through for each shot setup. On one end, you know, you've got adrenaline, it's a real thing, and it causes you to breathe more rapid, you get the jitters, whatever, all of that stuff. That makes us less ready to pull the trigger. That's a practical issue. We can just get into a state of excitement, right? You know, some deep breaths will help in this situation, but the reality is just exposure and experience is gonna help the most. But from my experience, that's the more minor factor in this equation. I'll do a step-by-step video on how I set up personally for my shots. I'll do that in a future video. But one of the keys as you set up for a shot is you need to have a goal. What are you trying to accomplish before that trigger breaks? You need to have not only a goal, but it needs to be an objective goal. An objective thing you can observe as you pull that trigger. Don't go into an uncontrolled shooting situation, you know, a hunting shooting situation, with the mentality of, I'll break the trigger, I'll pull that trigger when it feels right. Ask yourself if you're doing that. There are very few things that I will call outright incorrect. But if you're doing that, that's the incorrect way to formulate your shot setup. It exacerbates buck fever and it slows you way down. You need to decide on an objective benchmark for when you're ready to pull the trigger before you enter the mountains or woods. For most shooters that are hunting big game, here is a good conservative objective measure you can use. Use a pattern of hold with your reticle, all right? Take the inevitable movement in that reticle and make it into a pattern. Some folks like a circular pattern like this, right? And where they want to hit, they'll have at the bottom of the circle. So they'll control that movement with a circle with their crosshairs, all right? Another really common way that people do this, they control the movement in a pattern, is to use a sideways figure eight, all right? So this is where they want to hit, and they're moving that reticle, those crosshairs, so they contain that movement to the pattern, right? Once you figure out what pattern you prefer, or how you're gonna, manipulate that movement. Your objective goal in your shot setup is to restrict the movement of that pattern that you decide on, to restrict that to the vital area of the deer or elk you are targeting. Once you achieve that goal through the shot setup, you can break the trigger with confidence. Now guys, if you have a different objective measure that you use and you find it effective, please let me know in the comments. There are lots of ways to do it, and I am sure some of you have some great insight on this. My point is that you just can't have a subjective willy-nilly, oh, I'm gonna shoot when it feels right kind of concept. You need to have that objective benchmark that you're trying to achieve in your shot setup. Someone wanting a little more precision, they can break the trigger at a section of the pattern. So some folks who use like a circle pattern with the crosshairs, they're gonna go clockwise, and they're gonna start to break the trigger at 4 or 5 o'clock if their point of what they want to hit is at 6, right? They're basically leading the pattern a little bit. And you'll see the same thing with people using the figure 8 pattern. They're going to start to break the trigger basically at like 6:37, and then that's going to be right where they actually want to hit. But that's really beyond the scope of this video. Holding the pattern within that kill area is good enough. It's a simple objective goal. It's slightly conservative in the sense that without timing, regardless of when that trigger breaks on that pattern, you should have a dead elk or deer. Now, I'm sure there are many of you guys that are groaning right now. Of course, that is what we all do. We all know that you should do that. But these same people who are groaning right now will be out hunting with a buddy, and when a buck or bull turns broadside, they will start whispering at their buddy, shoot, 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 this sort of thing. The shooter needs to meet their own objective goal, then break the trigger. Hunters can reach a breaking point from their own nerves and outside stimulus like this, that shoot, 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 that pressure. They'll just crack the trigger to relieve the stress buildup. I've seen it happen. It sounds wild, but I've seen it happen a lot of times. That's the worst case, and you can be a contributor to that as an observer and a hunting partner. So keep that in mind when you're hunting with folks. What I do in this context is I will call a shot opportunity as an observer, right? I'll say something like, okay, there's a shot there, and then I'll be silent. But I never give commands to shoot, shoot, shoot. I view that as poor form, and you're not helping the hunter, okay? Just let them know, you can give them advice like, okay, there's a shot opportunity. And a lot of times if there's, animals moving around in a group, as a guide, I'll do this a lot just to give them a reference that they're not gonna, inadvertently hit 2 animals or some situation like that. I'll say, okay, you have a clear shot opportunity there. Okay, you have a clear shot opportunity there. But I don't continue to talk to them. I leave gaps of silence so they can meet their objective and shoot when they're ready. So this seems real complicated, right? So how can I say this is a faster way to shoot in hunting situations? Let me explain. With this system, it ends up like this, okay? With the objective measure, you go through your shot process, right? You get a position, you get your rest, etc., all right? And you're holding your reticle on the animal. Hold. Okay, I can't meet my objective goal. That means I immediately adjust my setup, all right? Then, now I'm back to hold. Now I'm meeting my objective, holding that pattern within the shot zone. Boom, okay? That's how that goes when you have an objective measure. Learning how to make those adjustments is a practice skill. You can check out my thoughts on that in an older video called Practical Marksmanship. I'll stick a link up here somewhere. But the point here I'm trying to make is that without an objective metric, it goes more like this. Well, is this good enough? Let me tighten up. Let me see if it gets better. Well, is that okay? Is that going to be good enough? Well, maybe I need to change. Maybe I need to move rest. Maybe we need to get closer. No, maybe I can do it. This sort of stuff goes on and on. If somebody doesn't have an objective measure before they take that shot and a goal of their shot setup, that's how it goes. And you miss opportunities or end up shooting when you shouldn't if you're doing that. All right, my number 2 big tip for not missing on these mountain hunts is master practical rest. I have a video that goes through a bunch of different rest setups that I use. You can check it out on the channel. And I also just hosted a podcast for Jay Scott, and myself and the guest Ryan, we talked about this a lot from a guide's perspective. You can check those out. I'm gonna keep it short here. The problem that I've seen a lot is guys hunt hard, they work hard, then at the point of shot opportunity, they decide in the field, now they're gonna figure out how to use their rest. It's just a huge brain fart. There's no other way to describe it. If you were going on a hunt in the next couple weeks, do this right now, okay? Use this piece of advice. Get in your living room with all your rest. Your rest options should be compatible with the vegetation you are hunting, all right? You know, if you're above timberline, a bipod, bipod prone or seated, that may be all you need, all right? Or maybe just your pack even when you have no vegetation to deal with. But if you're gonna be hunting in higher vegetation like oak brush and sage, you might need to bring some sticks, you may need to bring a longer bipod, or you may need to just be able to shoot on your pack tallways, right? Whatever makes sense, all right? You just need to make sure those are compatible. Get those rests in your living room and bring in your unloaded rifle. Put YouTube on your TV and just dial up, some show that has the species you're gonna hunt on it, right? And then pause on the image of those animals. Move around your living room, kitchen, couch, counter, whatever, and practice from those rests. Just get the bugs worked out that way. It makes an enormous amount of difference. You're gonna feel crazy goofy doing it, but just being able to, feel how those rests are gonna work and being able to get set up with them quicker is going to give you a huge advantage in the field, and you're going to avoid this problem altogether. When you're doing this, just keep in mind that with rests, obviously you want steadiness, but you also want to understand from what positions you have to fight with them, all right? So if that rest and how you're sitting is pulling away that sight picture, you need to practice so that goes away and you're not fighting those rests. In my experience, poor rest management is accountable for some aspect of missing in probably 25 to 30% of situations. All right, so the third tip is don't assume your capabilities. Know your capabilities. I try to really think about it like this. What percentage of folks have gone out, shot in mountain winds with a lightweight rifle that they can lug around in that terrain, wearing their hunting clothing and jackets without sandbags, on hunting rest from an angled platform via an angled shot to the target, doing all that and shot on a paper target and measured their group. We're not talking about shooting on metal targets. I'm talking about grouping on a paper target at true mountain ranges and mountain hunting conditions. I personally believe that less than 15% of elk and deer hunters have done this. And the thing is, that is the only way to truly know your capabilities, yet very few of us have done it. I personally started doing this, and honestly, I was blown away. I know that it is impractical for a lot of folks, so I'm going to share my observations with you. I've done the exact same thing with many other people in addition to myself, as I mentioned. Now, before I get in the depth of this, if you have done this, in the comments, let me know what your expectation was and then what your results were. I think it would be really helpful for folks to see the variation. I imagine some people are very close on their expectations to what they group at those distances and in those conditions, but I think others will have a big spread. In my personal data set and experience from all my years guiding, most hunters believe they can retain a 2 to 2.5 MOA group at 400 yards in real conditions. So 8 to 10 inch group at 400 yards. But the results are actually more like 18 inches to 25 inches. This is more like a 4 to 6-ish MOA group. A guy that really works at it, he can get that average down to 2.5 to 3 MOA in real conditions with a light gun. But they really know their rests and positions in real world terrain. So if we break down those numbers I just went through, and let's talk about elk. This means that the most proficient hunters, the top end guys, their top distance should probably be between 400 and 550 yards. But the average guy's top distance in real world conditions should probably be 250 to 300 yards. Now guys, I'm not saying that there aren't people out there that can ethically shoot further than what I just said. I'm just saying that in most situations and with most hunters, that's what they should stick to. So don't get your panties in a bunch, all right? But the point of all of this, guys, is that most people are overconfident in their abilities at distances and in real condition. And here's the thing in the context of hunting. You thinking you can shoot 500 yards when you can actually only shoot 250 yards is more detrimental to your overall hunting success versus the fact that you can only shoot 250 yards accurately versus 500 yards. Okay, so you're like, what? Hold on, what did you just say? That doesn't make sense. Well, let me try to clarify it a little bit. The act of you being overconfident is worse than the actual fact of being less capable by a lot. This makes this whole thing a very positive concept when we are talking about improving one's success in the field. Just the act of understanding your capabilities, that alone is going to make you way more proficient as a hunter. So here's why. In mule deer and elk country, if you can get to 450 yards, you can probably get to 300 yards with not a whole lot of incremental additional risk, right? I have a video on how I plan stocks. You can check it out. I'll stick a link here. But one of the steps is I locate where I think I'm actually going to take that shot, or the hunter I'm guiding is going to actually take that shot from before I do the stock. In that process, I'm considering my or my hunter's shooting abilities. If closing that distance from 450 yards to where we're going to take that shot to more like 300 yards increases my chances of a missed opportunity, botching the stock because we're closer now. Let's say that's 10% higher chance. There's 10% higher risk of that now. That is a whole hell of a lot better than the fact that shooting at 450 yards instead of 350 yards increases my chances of a missed animal by maybe 40 or 50%, all right? So that's just an example, all right? If you know your capabilities, you can adjust things accordingly. And those, the fact that you can't shoot that additional 100 yards, that additional 150 yards, that's probably going to be very, very minimal to the actual results that you see. But if you're naive to your abilities, you probably have a big relative gap, right? That you're losing there. You're always choosing spots to take shots from that are too far. You're choosing subpar locations to take shots from that your abilities aren't up to. But just with a little bitty more risk, you could take all that out of the equation, and your success rate is going to skyrocket, and you're going to miss and wound a whole lot fewer animals. All right, so let's talk about getting scoped, having a scope whack you in the face, all right? I'm not a competition shooter. I'm just a basic hunting guide, but I've seen many guys get scoped, and some of them are experienced guys, very experienced guys. It can happen to almost everyone. All it takes is a little brain fart in a tough shooting area. Keeping eye relief exact can be really tough. Probably the most common way it occurs is prone or sitting, against the backdrop, and you've got your neck kinked, right? So you're watching a sheep or a goat, and you're set up, but you're gonna have to shoot at a high angle up. What happens is you've got your rifle, you've got your face, and you end up with this kinking effect, and it can be pretty darn extreme. This is usually when the scoping occurs, and it's very hard to get a comfortable rest, get control, of your crosshairs, get the movement minimized, and then also account for the fact that you have to manipulate your eye relief because you have such an extreme angle you're dealing with because of your shooting position. That's usually when scoping happens, but it can happen for a whole bunch of other reasons too. Just a quick shot opportunity where somebody has to get down in a hole and they've got weird angles, and again, it's hard for them to just keep that natural eye relief. So one of the tricks is to just take a dab of shoe goo, okay, and make yourself an anchor point on your rifle. All right, you can see that I've done that right here, okay? Just like an archer would, or any other marksmanship, we're gonna try to create it so we have an anchor point on the stock of our gun, and I use the point of my cheek is always gonna touch that anchor point, all right? And so it doesn't matter what angle I'm sitting at, if it's very highly angled, to my gun, it's very highly angled down, it's flat, that eye relief is going to be very, very close to in all those situations. And where my eyeball sits in relation to this optic is also going to be very similar because I'm using that anchor point. If you shoot a little bit this way, it becomes very easy to implement that in your whole process. It basically just becomes something you don't even think about. You always have that little chunk there touching your cheek, all right? I'm gonna forewarn you guys that some people are gonna argue with that and say it creates other issues in terms of marksmanship. But from my experience, having a little anchor point on your stock helps a ton. It makes guys way more snappy when they're finding their eye relief, when they're on shot setups and things get weird in terms of platforms. Also, if they forget to adjust their parallax, right? You know, parallax adjustments on high magnification scopes at long distance do matter. That anchor point is actually going to help them so that eye is in the same spot in regards to where it sits in relation to their optic, all right? So that anchor point will also help with that if you just don't have time in your shot setup or you forget to make those parallax adjustments. Folks, implement these 3 tips and you're gonna miss and wound way fewer animals in the future. If you like this video, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. I have a bunch more videos on practical rifle shooting in the mountains on the channel. Please go check them out. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.